بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهرة ورحمة الله وبركاته. I begin in the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. All praise is due to Allah, and may peace and blessings be upon our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the topic for today's talk is the essence of Fatima Zahra's existence and the secret to her success. First, I would like to clarify that Fatima Zahra's essence is something that, as limited of capacity we have, is something that we will not reach. The reality is that we are a bit far from her reality. And it's something that we won't be able to completely comprehend, given the fact that we are not ma'soom, that we are fallible. And so her essence isn't something that we can reach. Now, I'm not here to give you guys a lecture about philosophy, and I don't think that is what the coordinators expected from me, but I just want to clarify that. And this isn't something that I'm saying it from my own words. It's something that Ayatollah Jawadi also says, and all the ulama believe in this as well. But we can try to strive in our own capacity a bit about her. We can try to strive to be like her. We can strive to take inspiration from her. And that is what the point of this session is, to benefit from her existence and to benefit from her presence, inshallah. And the more we grow closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more we purify our souls, we can understand more about her. There's a verse in the Quran that says, "La yumassahu illa al-mutahharun," that no one can touch the Quran except the purified ones. Now this verse is about the Quran, but this verse also applies to the Ahlul Bayt. This verse also applies to Bibi Fatima Zahra. Now why do I say that? You see, I remember when I was in the Hawza and I had this discussion with one of my teachers, and he said something interesting. He said that the Ahlul Bayt and the Quran, there are two sides of the same coin. And that if you took the Ahlul Bayt and you made them into a book and you wrote them as a book, it would become the Quran. And if you took the Quran and you made it a human being, it would become the Ahlul Bayt. And so when you get close to one, when you get close to the Quran, you get closer to Fatima Zahra. And when you get closer to Fatima Zahra, you get closer to the Quran. And inshallah, that is what we are striving for. So the more we purify our souls, the more we cleanse our souls, the more we will understand Fatima Zahra. And so it should be one of our priorities in a life to strive for that, to purify our hearts so that we can understand more and get closer to our essence, inshallah. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, what I want to clarify is that just because Fatima Zahra was the mother of our 12 imams, and just because, 11 imams, and just because she was the wife of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and just because she was the daughter of our Prophet, it doesn't make her who she was. Her essence is based on her own perfection and her own wujud and her own essence. These relationships she has do not make her who she is as a complete human being. Sometimes we can take that aspect of her and say, well, she was the daughter of the Prophet. The Prophet also had two other sons who passed away early in their life, yet they did not have the same perfection. They did not have the same, the hadiths that we have about her are not the same that were about them. And also, Fatima bint Asad, the mother of Imam Ali, was also the mother of the 12 Imams. yet she did not have the same station of Fatima al-Zahra. So we need to understand that her being was because of who she was. It was something internal. It has nothing to do with her existential relationships that she had. And this isn't, again, I'm quoting from Ayatollah Jawadi Amali, that it isn't an itibari relationship. It is a relationship from the outside. It had nothing to do with the reality of her inside. So that's one. Two, the second point I want to make is that Fatima al-Zahra, even though she's a female, it does not mean she is just a role model for females. She is an example for all of mankind, for both men and women. And she is timeless. She is an example for all of mankind, regardless of time, regardless of where a person lives, regardless of gender, and regardless of age, young and old. We can all benefit from her existence. And we see this from the Imams too. The Imams were constantly asking help from her. We have narrations of the Imams doing tawassul to her, asking her for help, doing istighasa. Inshallah, we'll get into that later on. So it's important to understand this, that we all can take benefit from her regardless of who we are, inshallah. Now, the topic of this session is that what makes her her? What is the secret of her success? And yes, we can say that she was raised by the Prophet, and surely that had an effect on her, there's no doubt. But that was part of it. That's not the whole story. At the end of the day, it was her own choice to be Fatima al-Zahra. It was her own will to be the best lady amongst the world. She chose to be that lady every single day and show up as that. And I think sometimes we forget about that. Sometimes when we talk about the ma'asumin, when you talk about the Ahl Bayt, because they are ma'asum, because we think of them as infallibles, sometimes we forget that they also had a choice to make. They chose to be who they are. And we have that choice too. We can show up every single day as the best version of ourselves. We have that opportunity, and it's important to recognize that the Ahl Bayt had that opportunity, and they lived their life into the best version of themselves and in the ma'asum form. Now, sometimes, you might argue with me and say, no, Sister Maryam, she's ma'asum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave her all these things, all these blessings. She was privileged to be the wife of Imam Ali. She was privileged to be the daughter of Imam Ali. So I refer you to her ziyarat, the ziyarat that we recite for Fatima al-Zahra. The first words, if you look up dawes.org and look up her ziyarat, the first line, it says this: Ya mumtahana, امتحانك الله الذي خلقك قبل أن يخلقك فوجد لما امتحن صابرة. And the translation is this: O carefully examined lady, Allah who created you had tried you before He created you for this worldly life, and thus He found you successfully enduring in that trial. What does this mean? This ziyarat is telling us that Bibi Fatima al-Zahra was tried, meaning that she was tested the same way we are tested every day. And she passed that test, meaning that she willed to be Bibi Fatima al-Zahra. She willed to be the best lady on earth. And she strived in that path. Her willpower got her where she is in today's, in the dunya and the akhirah. And so who she was, first and foremost, is that she was an abd, she was a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I hope I can keep my voice as loud as our next door neighbors. So, inshallah khair. So as we say, when we recite, when we're in tashahud, when we are in prayer, we say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. صل على محمد وآل محمد. We say that, we bear witness that our Prophet is an abd and the messenger. We first bear witness that he is a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before he is a prophet. And this is something for us to really ponder about, that the first and foremost thing that the Prophet was an abd, was a servant. And this is what makes him who he is, servitude. And it's the same thing what makes Fatima Zahra who she was, a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And she lived that life whole every single day, choosing to be a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, choosing to live as a servant, an abd, humbly, and subserving her Lord. And that's who she was. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, to make this practical, I don't want to just give you guys beautiful words and leave it there. I want to make this practical. How many of us choose to live as a servant every single day? How many of us wake up in the morning and decide that today I'm going to be an abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How many of us make that intention? It's something to ask. Because if we live life passively, we're just going to be reactive to the things that are happening. But if you get up in the morning and make that intention and start your day off like that and visualize your day as an abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you'll be able to respond to life in a much better way, in a much more holistic, as well as a better servant to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you're living life intentionally. And I think that's something that we can take from her life, is that we live our life intentionally with the intention of being an abd to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah. And again, there's different ways we can set up reminders for ourselves. You can take your cell phone, you can put up and set an alarm that who do I want to be today? I have it on my own phone, my own cell phone. I have an alarm that in the midst of the day it will go off and it will say, who do I want to be? To remind myself that today, how do I want to show up as? And it's a huge question to ask, and especially when you're in the middle of the day, when you're talking to your spouse, when you're talking to your children, how you're going to show up. It will change your attitude. It will change the way you react to things. It's a really strong thing to comprehend and think about. I know it sounds very primitive and it sounds very basic, but how many of us do this? And I want to ask each and every one of you guys to make this a part of your day, that you think, who am I going to be today? It will make a huge difference, inshallah. So, hopefully we can take that as a point that, inshallah, we can implement. Now, the second thing that I want to talk about is that on the day of judgment, as we all know, is that she gives shafa'ah. So what I want to do is that there's a hadith from Ilal al-Sharaya. And this hadith is narrated from Imam Baqir alayhi salam. And again, I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not going to read the whole hadith. But the hadith goes that on the day of judgment, people who are mu'min or kafir, it will be written upon their foreheads if they're or a mu'min, if they're a believer or a disbeliever. And on that day, those people who are lovers of Ahlul Bayt, yet they've done a lot of sins, will be told to go toward hellfire. And amongst that day, Fatima Zahra will read on their foreheads and say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, "O Allah, O Sayyidi, you name me Fatima." And Fatima means that which prevents people from hellfire. So, and you've promised that whoever loves me and my children, you will prevent them from entering hellfire. And your promise is truth, your promise is haqq, and you do not go against your promise. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will respond, "O Fatima, what you have said is true. I've named you Fatima, and because of you, I will those who love you and your children, I will prevent them from going to hellfire. And my promise is true, and I won't go against it. I have told these people to go to, these people who have sinned, to go toward hellfire so that you can intercede for them, and that my intercession from you will be accepted. Because of this, so that your position and status will be shown to the angels and the prophets, and everyone in the day of judgment can see that. And so that whoever has been written a mu'min on their foreheads, that you will read that upon them, and you will take their hand and you will take them to paradise. So essentially, it's just saying how Fatima Zahra will essentially take the lovers of Ahlul Bayt, take their hand and bring them into the paradise and save them from the hellfire. That's what the gist of the hadith is saying. Now, what I want to take from this is her attitude. Whatever happens in the day of judgment, there's a reality behind it in this world. Meaning that things don't happen there out of nothing. The reality, the seed of it, it's planted here. The reality of it, it's planted here. What can we take from this? Her attitude toward the Shias, her attitude to the lovers of Ahlul Bayt is that she loves them. She cares for them. She wants what's best for them. She wants to take their hand and bring them into paradise. Now, for us, what can we take from this? Is to have the same attitude towards each other. Often, more than not, our attitudes aren't usually not like this. Or at least sometimes, unfortunately, I see this in our masjids, in our communities, is that our attitudes are a little bit rough. That we're not kind towards each other, or we're not thinking about the other person. Do we think like Fatima Zahra? Do we want to take their hand and bring them into paradise? How many of us think like this? Salat al Muhammad wa al Muhammad. And this is the attitude. It's something that we can inspire toward. We can love each other that much that if we have the chance on the day of judgment, that we try to pull each other toward paradise. We can have that attitude. We can love each other that much. That's the attitude that the Ahlul Bayt have taught us. Now, I want to talk about one specific thing that we can do to actually manifestate this. Amr ma'ruf and nahi al-munkar. Enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. Enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, the manifestation of that is actually taking someone's hand and pulling them into paradise. Why? Because we're telling them, don't do that sin. Or we're telling them, do that wajib. That's what the reality of Amr Ma'ruf and Nahi al-Munkar is. It is that we care for someone else, and we care for them that much that we want them to not enter into hellfire. And that we want to pull them into paradise. That's the reality of Amr Ma'ruf and Nahi al-Munkar. That we care about them. Now, you might tell me, you might say then, how do we do Amr Ma'ruf and Nahi? How am I supposed to implement this? And I mention this because typically in our community, something that I'll see is, I'll give an example. A sister chooses to wear a hijab, chooses to practice the hijab, yet her hijab is not complete. Let's say she's wearing tight clothes. Often I'll see other sisters talk about her and they'll say like, oh, look at her, she's wearing hijab but she's wearing tight clothes. I would prefer if she just took off her hijab. Now that's not the right attitude here. She's practicing a part of religion, yet she's not practicing another part. Just because she's not practicing it in full doesn't mean that we should take what she is practicing correctly. We should try to help her to improve and fully practice what she, to the largest extent. Again, this goes against Amr Ma'ruf and Nahi Munkar to tell someone else, oh, because you don't practice this part of religion, leave it. Leave religion completely. That's the wrong attitude, because you're essentially telling them, go to hell, unfortunately. So how do we do this? How am I supposed to try to bring someone else and take someone's hand and bring him into paradise? And by the way, this is very, very applicable to parents, especially to parents, because as parents, you're trying to raise your children and get them into paradise, right? Inshallah, I'm assuming whoever is a parent here or will be a parent, that's their goal and that's what they want to do. So this is extremely important. First is your attitude. First is the purpose. When you do amr ma'ruf and you do nahi anil munkar, when you enjoin the good and forbid the evil, it should be with the right intention. It should be with the intention of, hey, Sarah, I want you to go to paradise. Hey, Sarah, I don't want you to go enter hell. Oh, Ali, I don't want you to enter hellfire. I want you to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The intention is first and foremost there. And it's like any wajib. Whenever you do any wajib, you have to make the intention, right? When you fast, you make the intention to grow closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or when you start salah, you start with the intention, right? So you start with the intention of growing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That intention should be the same thing when you do amr ma'ruf and nahi al-munkar. It should be to first and foremost for you to grow closer to Allah, but also for that person to grow closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That should be there. So making the right intention is key. Now, following that right intention is that you tell them something that is very effective, and I've seen its effect on other people, is that you tell that person, hey Sarah, or hey Maryam, or hey Zahra, I care about you, I want the best for you, and if I'm telling you this, it's because I really do care about you. Right? If you clarify that to that person, hey, I actually care about you, and I actually love you, and I'm telling this from your own benefit, the chances of that person accepting that from you is much more. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't clarify this, and sometimes we don't even mention it. But try it. Try it, you'll see a difference. So that's one thing. Second is that the way when you say it and how you say it, how you word it in your tone. Now, there is, for example, when you want to tell someone have a seat, you can say it in so many different ways. You can tell a person, please get comfortable, or you can say, please take a seat, or you can tell them, have a seat, or you can say, sit down, or you can tell them, sit. Which one is the best one to say? Which one would you prefer? Which one? Please have a seat, or please get comfortable, right? It sounds the best way, right? So there's so many ways you can word something. So before you go to approach that person, think, how should I word this? What is the best way to word it where that person isn't going to get offended, right? What is the best way to approach it without my ego involved? Because guess what? If a person's telling someone else to sit or sit down, the chances are it's coming from their ego. It's not coming from their intellect. Right? So it's important to make sure where it's coming from internally. If it's coming from your intellect, if it's coming from the proper place where it should be coming from the proper niyyah, you will say it in a better manner. Now, the tone of voice also matters. If you're yelling at someone, sit down, or if you're telling someone, please have a seat, that tone in itself, even if you tell someone, please get comfortable, please take a seat, but you yell at them or you say it in a derogatory manner, it's not going to be effective. So pay attention to the voice that you're using, because we have different voices. Sometimes we have a parental voice, we have a child voice, and we also have an aqli voice, an intellectual voice. The intellectual voice is the voice we want to use. It's the low tone, soft-spoken, kind voice that we should be using. And that's effective. Now, also pay attention when you say something, right? If a person is already dealing with a bunch of things, let's say, God forbid, their loved one has passed away, or they're dealing with a bunch of issues at work, or if your husband has gone to work and came back and they're just really tired, it might not be the right time and place to tell it to them. Different times will affect how effective your words will be. So be smart about it, right? Speaking to a person when they're fresh, refreshed, they're not tired, they're up for it, has an effect. So make sure you pay attention to the timing as well. And I want to bring an example for this. If you guys can recite another salat, please. So a few years ago, it's actually more than a few years ago, I used to work in an Islamic school, and I was an Islamic teacher and as well as a math teacher. And during prayer time, I would watch my students pray, and I would try to ask them to take their prayers very seriously. And for the most part, I most of the time I'd feel like I was failing because they wouldn't take it seriously, because kids are kids. There were high school students, there were middle school students, and anyway, during that year, my brother passed away. And when my brother passed away, I asked the school to bring as many of my students as they could to the funeral. And when that happened, they buried my brother, and afterward I asked my students to gather around my brother's grave. And they were all in tears, they were all crying, they were looking at me, and I told them, I pointed to the grave and told them that, today you guys left the school you left your lessons to learn another lesson, and this is your lesson. My brother said his last prayers that day, and he didn't know it was his last prayers. And I kept on telling you guys at school that it could be your last prayers. Take it seriously. The second thing I told them was that don't take your family for granted. I wish I would give anything in the world to be able to hug my brother one more time, but I can't. It's too late. So don't take your family for granted. I didn't know how effective that was, but I knew that it had a huge effect on them because I could see that they were effective, they were crying with me, and they all gave me hugs afterward. And years later, when I stopped teaching at that school and I moved to Qom and I started studying in the Hawza. And so this past year when Corona hit, everything was closed, and I was kind of bored. So I started an IG account and an Instagram account. And I started to reconnect with my students from the past. And it was interesting because when this year was like the 8th year, the anniversary, and I posted the video of the burial. And it was interesting because some of my students responded to me and they told me that we still think about what you told us that day. When you say something, it has an effect when and where you say something. There are certain moments in life which, when you say something, it's more effective. And my students told me that I had one of my students tell me that ever since that day, I took my prayers seriously, right? So it has a huge effect, knowing when and where to say something. And it's interesting, I noticed that a few of my students, they started to wear the hijab this past year. And so sometimes when you say something, you're planting seeds for later on. Don't expect things to be effective right then and there. Sometimes that person isn't ready to accept what you've told them, but you just planted a seed. And what ends up happening is that later on, years down the path, they're ready to implement that. So as parents, especially as parents and teachers, remember that. Don't give up. Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, he preached his people for 950 years. Okay? We need to take that as aspiration and not get tired with our kids, even though if they don't listen to us once or twice. Remember Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, that 950 years, he will always beat us when it comes to how many times he's told his people to do the right thing. So hopefully keep that in mind, inshallah. I hope that story resonated with you. Now, going back to the topic, we're talking about Bibi Fatima Zahra, and you might say, well, Sister Maryam, this lecture is about Bibi Fatima Zahra, not Amr Ma'ruf. So bringing it back to the topic is that, again, as we talked about, she gives shafa, she intercedes on behalf of all of us and on behalf of the lovers of the Ahlul Bayt, and brings people to paradise. And so my point about the whole Amr Ma'ruf thing is that we should also try to bring people to paradise, and that we should strive in her path. Now, you might ask me, what's her secret? I can tell you, we can talk about her different names, that she has many different names. We can talk about her different qualities. But what makes her her? We said that she chose to be an abd. She chose by her will to be an abd, a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what tool did she use to get to that point? And the response I can give back to that is her aql, her intellect. And I mention this because often, more than not, I see this in our communities, we forget to talk about this. If you open Usul al-Kafi, which is one of the most important books of hadith that we have, the first chapter is about the aql, the intellect. And that's before tawheed, before talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Through the aql, through the intellect, we choose to be Muslim. We choose to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? The often, more than not, we forget about it. We leave it at that. But no, we need to take that and continue with that. What do I mean by that? Yes, as Muslims, we are supposed to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have certain things that are wajib for us to do, certain things that are haram for us to do. And we try to implement that. Now, everything else in life typically is up to us, right? If I want to go to the park today, if I want to go shopping today, if I want to volunteer at a conference, all of these things, it's mubah. There's no wajib or haram, right? It's up to us to choose what we want to do. So what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to do istighfar every single time that I want to go to the shopping center or the mall or the theater or whatever? No. How are we supposed to figure out if I'm going to be an abd of Allah, if I'm going to be a servant of Allah, if I'm going to will that, how do I figure out what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from me? And this answer goes back to this, our intellect, our aql. What do I mean by that? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave each and every one of you an aql, an intellect. And He gave us religion to follow, which you chose with your aql to be a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now everything in between is your choice, and it's based on your aql to choose what you want to do. Each and every one of us has this potential. Each and every one of us has an aql. It's up to us to use it. And if we don't use it, we'll fall into using our ignorance or jahl, unfortunately. So you're supposed to figure out things based on that intellect. And this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us izzah. He gives us dignity. He gives us that choice of allowing us to use our aql. And so that is why when we talk about figuring out life, when we're talking about choosing a job, choosing a spouse, choosing, anything, choosing what to buy, He doesn't tell us what to do. He says, no, use your aql. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, use your aql, figure it out, right? And if you can't figure it out, talk to someone. Do mashfara, seek counsel. And then the last resort, if you cannot figure out everything else, then you go into istighfar, you seek, you go to the Quran, right? But understand that the more you use your aql, the more you use your intellect, the stronger it will get. It's like a muscle. The person who goes to the gym 3 times a week, 4 times a week, is better in shape, right? Because they use their muscles more. And it's the same thing with the intellect. The more you use it, the stronger it will get, the more it will aid you. But it's recognizing that each and every one of you has that potential in you. And learn to trust it. Because sometimes we don't trust ourselves. And that's not okay. We need to learn to trust ourselves, to trust the aql, to trust what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. And this is the reality of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us dignity. He wants you, each and every one of you, to choose how you want to live your life. He doesn't want to tell you He doesn't want to give instructions for A to Z. And it's really important to understand that. And if you use that aql, and you will be able to grow closer, inshallah, to Fatima Zahra, to really understand who she was. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. 3 minutes. So, I'm pretty much done with my lecture. I just want to give one more point. And that is, when we talk about Bibi Fatima Zahra, as we said, that she is the interceder on the Day of Judgment. Don't be aware how strong and powerful of a figure she is. That whenever you need help, ask her for help. It can be simple as just saying, Assalamu alayki ya Fatima Zahra. It could be as simple as doing a 2 rakat prayer of Istighasat al-Zahra, doing a 2 rakat prayer, and then going, I think it's in the Mafati, in the prayer, and then you go into sujood, I think there's like 300 for Fatima, but even if you can't say that, do as many as you can. Our ulama, our scholars, there's so many stories of scholars and people asking her for intercession, and miracles have come up from it. My point is this: she is someone we can constantly seek help from, and we should. She's a very, very strong figure. Even the Ahlul Bayt would ask her for help when they needed help for. So don't forget to ask her for help whenever you need help. Inshallah. All right. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.